the Japanese had been into China since 1936, and they knew how to fight, and they knew what fighting was.
How, when you were operating out of Port Moresby
Yes.
in New Guinea, that was probably about February or March of 42.
That's correct.
Okay.
And many is the day, I was the total offensive effort for the United States Air Force on that day. I'll guarantee you that.
Because you only had a few planes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we didn't have anything in the States to send them. We were the dregs that they put together to transfer the airplanes to the Philippines. And of course, when we got there, the Philippines had already fallen.
Okay, so at this point you're at Port Moresby. It's around March of 42. What kind of missions were you running then? And what do you recall anything about your first mission that you flew?
Well, what we would do is our home base was Townsville, Australia, which is on the east coast of Australia. And due north of that was Port Moresby, New Guinea. And that's where we fueled and got our weapons on board and got a night's rest. We would only get off the ground about 7 or 8 in the morning, and we were running mostly to the east because that's where the Japanese were running the Midnight Express to Guadalcanal with Chesley Puller and his gang, the Marines. And I have the greatest respect for the Marines, even if they're a little bit too powerful on the public relations end of the war. But we would take out with a full combat crew. And the thing that kind of irritated me just a little bit was we were on reconnaissance. We had half fuel in one bomb bay. The other bomb bay, we normally carried 4 1,000-pound bombs. So we were offensive if we needed to be, and we were also responsible for reconnaissance, which is taking pictures of anything we saw that was of enemy and ports. Normally we were assigned 4 or 5 targets to fly over, which got you shot at all the time. The other people were on straight bombing runs. They had a target to go to once a day. A target and 5 targets are a different situation entirely. But I must admit, the roughest ride I ever had was, we took off from Moresby, and my one target was, and it was an offensive target, was Lae, New Guinea, which is just over the Owen Stanley Range, which the Japanese had, and which Amelia Earhart took off for her island and never appeared again.
This was an airfield at Lae.
That's right, Lae Airfield. So I had an excellent bombardier, and we went up and down a few things before going over the Owen Stanley, but the Owen Stanley Range is about 13,000 feet high. So you had to gain a little altitude before you started to cross. And as my bombardier was making the run on Lae Airport, he said, "Lieutenant, I see 5 Japanese Zeros taking off with a good dust trail behind of each one." And I said, "That's okay, you stay on your run." And he did drop all 4 bombs on the runway and did a very nice job. And in 17 minutes after I'd bombed, made my turn to go to Horn Island, which is in northern Australia, I got my first pass at a Zero. And they were making head-on passes, these 5 Zeros. I had that B-17 balls to the wall, and I started letting down just a little bit, and we were indicating at 25,000 feet, we were indicating about 210, which gave us about 425 true airspeed. And those zeros were making circles around me. And these great big headlight tracers are floating at you just like this. And what you wanted to do, you wanted to take that armor plate back of you and bring it over you, because that zero was aiming those tracers straight at you. I got one gunner in the back severely wounded. The ball turret, as you described it, which we had, operator was laid flat on the bottom of the airplane. He got a 20mm shell into the back of his head, and I got just shot full of holes. And I must admit, I had my doubts. I really had, up until that point, I knew those bastards weren't going to get me. But we got on Horn Island, I fueled up again, and I kept administering Novocaine to my gunner because he was starting to get paralysis on one side. I got him back into Brisbane to the General Hospital that night, and they operated on him and took a piece of his skull off about the size of $1 and put a silver plate in his head, regained his composure, and sent him back to school in the States, and he became a pilot. That was my roughest ride in 2 theaters that I flew in.
Do you recall the date that happened?
We had the inlay at that point. I found out later on they had their #1 Japanese ace.
What?
Another little thing. You know, there was the Battle of the Coral Sea. We'd been to 1 or 2 targets taking pictures. And all of a sudden I saw this rather large boat. This is March. Well, I told the navigator, change course and I'm going to go over and take a look at that big ship. So in about 7 or 8 minutes, I got some flak in my altitude at 25,000. So I figured, well, he's shooting at me, it must be a Jap. So I told the bombardier, open those bomb bay doors, we're going to make a run on that guy. So sure enough, we had an intervalometer set up, dropped 4 1,000-pounders with about 200 feet between each bomb, bombs away. About 1 minute and 20 seconds, they hit the ground. I know nobody's going to hear this tape, so I'll use the word I want to use. Oh shit, we missed those bastards. So we were at the end of our tour. We came back into Moresby that afternoon, and there was a brigadier general and 2 colonels met me. The general said, Lieutenant, you just missed the USS Chicago.
Oops.
Oh, what a tragedy. And everybody says, can't you recognize an American ship? What are you talking about? I'm at 25,000 feet and I'm supposed to recognize the USS Chicago?
Well,
the bastards were shooting at me.
Why didn't they recognize you?
I said, I don't blame them for shooting at me. I had a 4-engine bomber with a big dorsal fin, and even if they had replicas, they wouldn't have the big dorsal fin. So, thank God I did not hit the Chicago, because if I did, one of those, just one of those bombs would have blown that ship in half, easily, because we had 1/10 second delay on the fuse. And that 1/10 second, they put it right in the middle of Chicago. And then it just blowed it to. So that's just a little side idea. But my whole interest in the military, it still was, and still is today, strategic air, big airplanes. My reputation is test flying all the new fighters, but I didn't do it in wartime conditions.
So how many missions did you finally end up in the Pacific?
I flew about 48.
Okay, and that was with which groups, which outfits?
I was with we were attached but did not live with the 19th Bomb Group, which was the group in the Philippines which we were trying to get to. And by that time, the dregs of what was left of the 19th Bomb Group came down into Australia, and my squadron commander was made the commander of the 19th Bomb Group when they got reorganized after being run out of the Philippines.
Okay,
But we were their recce squadron.
right. So you were there until what was the date that you,
They repatriated us after a year.
and that was,
I came back to the States in December of 1942.
okay, okay. And when you came back to the States, what did they assign you to?
They assigned me to training B-17 crews in Payo, Texas,
Okay,
on a brand new clapboard base called the Rattlesnake Base in West Texas.
okay.
And I'm not saying that it was bad, I'm just saying it was worse than Port Moresby, New Guinea.
That's saying a lot.
And I soon got tired of training crews. And then we could go on to our 384th time in England.
Well, this might be a good time. You were, how long were you training crews?
I was training crews for about 3 or 4 or 5 months.
Okay,
Then I wanted to see what Europe looked like and North Africa, so I got myself assigned to what they called temporary groups. I took 40 B-17 crews to North Africa through the South American trip.
Whoa.
There were 2 trips, one through the North, Newfoundland, and one through the South, through Brazil.
okay.
And I took my 43 trips up to North Africa, and they were just going into Italy at the time, and I ended up with 40 B-17 crews in Foggia, Italy.
What was your role in doing that?
To have some, it was called the Thacker Group.
Okay.
The Thacker Provisional Group.
Okay.
So they had somebody that they could come to if they had an engine out, or sick, lame, or lazy, or AWL, or whatever. And I liked that. It took us about a month, but we got them all together here in Nebraska, and took them down this way.
You're basically organizing the group.
That's correct.
Okay,
At least I got 40 B-17s, didn't lose a B-17. We got 40 B-17s to Foggia, Italy.
well, very good.
Brand new B-17s.
And you did that twice?
No, only once.
Only once, okay.
Only once.
And when you finished, what was the date roughly you did that?
Oh my gosh, that was, I had my Christmas dinner on the hood of a Jeep in Foggia, Italy in 1943.
Okay, okay, so it's preceding that, probably, you were organizing that group probably a
That's
few
right.
months before
That's
that,
right. That's
sometime in the fall of '43. Okay, now when you got that done, and now everyone knows Thacker can do that,
I reported back into here, and I said, now my situation is a little bit different. This was a business that I wanted to be in. This was my life. This is like joining Ford or General Motors or GE. I was not a draftee. I was in the place before World War II was thought about. I had a 1.5 year service in December the 7th, married, enjoyed the military, so I wanted to improve myself. So if you're a military man and the war is on, you go where the greatest noise is. The greatest noise was in Europe. Germany was first, the Japanese Pacific was second.
That was the priority then.
That was the priority then. So I snivelled my way to Europe, and I wanted to go and fly B-17s out of England, and I had a couple of influential friends. One of them was Dick Carmichael, my initial squadron commander in Pearl Harbor, and he got me a nice assignment in the 384th Bomb Group in Grafton Underwood, just 40 miles north of London. And as I remember, I reported sometime in middle of April.
Of 44.
Of 44.
Okay, that's what we have. That's information that's on,
correct.
that we understand.
And I flew I was director of operations for Dale Smith, who was our group commander. And Dale grew 4 inches after he got at West Point. So we had a special airplane and a special seat always made for him. But some of his command airplanes were shot up pretty bad, so we had to make a few special chairs for a 6'6" individual.
Yeah, he was very large.
I was his air deputy. We had an air deputy and a ground deputy. The ground deputy see that you were fed and housed. The air deputy was my responsibility to run a good air operation. I must say that after I am a rated bombardier, a Norden bombardier, and after I got into some situations that I changed personally, we almost was the top leading scorer for bombs away in England for a month. The 379th, right next to us, always led. But we were in 0.5% of the leading group in bombs scoring, and it was just because of more detailing the background I had of being a bombardier, of the very simple changes we made. Our scores started going up, and after all, that's our business, was bombing. And if you go out and dump them in an orchard someplace, you're not making much money. You just got to go back the next day and get your ass shot again. So
accuracy counts.
That's what I did for a year.
Right.
And
well, you brought the scores up. You focused the crews.
The scores up.
Did you when you were there? Of course, you had this training as a bombardier. Where did you pick that up and when?
In my squadron in Salt Lake.
Okay.
We had an iron ass commander, and I can shoot a 3-star fix. I'm a registered navigator and registered bombardier.
You had it covered, pretty much.
I had him covered.
Okay.
So, but no, you would be surprised. It's kind of hard to know, but I was lucky.
When you were in the 384th, now
Yes.
they brought you in, and I guess Dale Smith, obviously you worked well with him and getting
Yes, I did.
and with improving the group and looking at those kinds of things that would improve the group, including the training of some of the guys. You probably looked at that very closely or worked with squadron commanders.
Well, I was very lucky, and I had good commanders, and I was flying an excellent airplane, and I showed up with 2 Silver Stars, 2 Air Medals, the Distinguished Flying Crosses, 10 Air Medals. Well, you carry a little respect with that, And I got a little respect that maybe I didn't deserve. But nevertheless, I had a few accolades when I showed up. And I was on a second tour, which was unheard of.
Well, you brought a lot of experience that the group needed, and then in leadership and in the kinds of things, technical things.
You just cannot. You just have to get experience by leading.
So exactly. So when you went into combat in Europe, of course, had to get your feet wet again, looking at all the operations and what was going on and what they were doing. At that point, that was probably May of '44. You started flying some missions with some of the missions.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And
I started flying immediately.
How many missions did you fly with the 384?
I flew 33 missions.
Okay.
In fact, I finished my last mission and I led the 8th Air Force. And I had 2,200 bombers behind me.
Oh my gosh.
So they had great confidence in me later on to lead. Well, then that's all I did was lead. But I was on duty every third night as senior officer for that, to make sure that flight took off, decisions were made on weather and things of that nature on the ground.
When you were doing operations on the ground before each mission,
That's correct.
the mission would come in through teletype to you.
Our ops order would come in about midnight, and then we'd take a look at it, and intelligence started their briefing procession.
Were you part of that process?
No, I was not. I was all over the place.
Okay, so you're doing lots of different jobs. Okay.
I wanted to make sure that our bombardiers were properly briefed. The nav people knew what they were doing. The squadrons had adequate leaders. We had a squadron leader. And
you also said there was a ground, you were the part of the air deputy. There was a ground deputy.
Depending upon the target position, we had some 2 o'clock in the morning departures, which were very difficult to get formation at night, and we lost a few airplanes. And but primarily they were early morning departures.
Did you work closely with the deputy ground fellows, or is that part of what you required? In terms of the maintenance, how did that work?
That was a big sore point. By the time you had flown your 18th mission, you were either dead or you were a prisoner. Now, here are the ground people. God bless the ground people. But nevertheless, they were going to go home. And they had all the local girls all tied up because they were there every night. And they got fresh eggs off base. The flying crews never had that time or that opportunity to make connections for a normal life. So the ground people and the air people were completely different worlds in England.
Right.
Completely different worlds.
You didn't have to coordinate any of that coordination between maintenance.
I was only responsible for flying it.
Okay.
The deputy commander for ground, he made sure that there were food on the table and a place to sleep.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. That was something I was always curious about. What if you had anything? But that's fine. That's okay. That's the way it worked.
That's the way life is.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's the way.
That's life. But
Understood.
Nevertheless.
Yeah. So you're flying missions at that point. You arrived just before D-Day, which was in June of '44.
I was out on D-Day. In fact, I flew a mission on D-Day, right out of Paris, to disturb any of a big terminal, railroad terminal. Now I use the date loosely, and you can't figure out what the hell I'm talking about, because D-Day was the 5th of June. However, it didn't happen on the 5th of June, it happened on the 6th of June. And on the mission that I flew on the 5th, which was supposed to be D-Day, you could walk on boats from England to Normandy. You could literally walk on boats. You didn't have to go by boat, you could walk. There were so many boats, but the weather was so rough on the 5th that Eisenhower postponed D-Day on 24 hours. However, I was senior officer on duty, and we flew 2 missions that day. And I handled both of them, but we bombed through an undercast. So I don't think the 384th did much damage bombing through, well, I know we didn't do any damage bombing through an undercast.
This was a big problem in Europe, of course, was the weather that you would get off the North Sea, come across England into Europe. It was a lot of overcast days.
We normally dropped on the lead airplane. That is the best of 50 bombardiers, because we usually flew in 54 airplanes, with 54 airplanes per box. The average circular error, now the bombardier is best of 50 to start with, so we put him in the front. And in school, he had to bomb within 322 feet of the target. You with me? The average visual bombs dropped in England in World War II was 5 miles. So, smoke screens, trying to find a downtown drugstore in the middle of Berlin with smoke screens, anti-aircraft fire, fighters, and cloud cover. Not easy. Not easy. Not easy at all. So along about the first 2 or 3 months of my flight, we got a little help with radar. We got what we called it a Mickey, but it wasn't finite. The modern bomb sight was finite. But where's a bank building in downtown Berlin? You couldn't find the bank building in downtown Berlin. If I sent you by foot, you couldn't find it. And they expect you to find it from 25,000 feet? Smoke screens, fighters, flak, and cloud cover. So the bombardier had a hell of a tough time.
Well, so at that point, I guess the war was starting to build up toward the invasion,
we were
and so you guys were very busy.
We were going
very busy. So you landed right in the middle of a tough, busy spot. Of course, it always was, but at that point, then you knew the target was really to support that operation, besides your strategic bombing as well.
My hats off to that enlistee ground pounder. I'll tell you, the winner of 44, 45 around Bastogne, around Christmas time of 44, it was terrible. It was the worst winter in 40 years. And our troops were, well, we ran out of troops. They had to tell Eisenhower that there's no more troops. You've got to finish off the job with what you have. The problem is, if the war goes on long enough, the smart GI can figure out some way to get off of that front line. And I don't blame him. I don't blame him. He's a smart man, that GI.
So at this point, you're probably around December of 44 when you started.
The weather
it was very
just
difficult.
God awful.
Yeah.
It was even snowing all over England. We could not get off the ground to help those guys in Bastogne. And they needed help.
I guess, okay, so you were there at the 384th for 1 year, about 1 year. And of
A
course,
little better than a year. I came home in June, I think.
okay. And after, of course, VE Day, when hostilities stopped in Europe, at least
I was on my way home.
you're all ready to go.
I was on board the Ile-de-France that carries 2,000 passengers, and there were 14,000 of us on board.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
You either stood on deck or laid in your bunk.
And you got into New York City, I presume.
Well, when I came home, I had a 30-day leave on the West Coast with my sweetheart. I was married at the time, of course. And I knew of all these new aircraft coming off the line. And I was on my way, actually, out in the Pacific again.
So
That's where the noise was.
You got assigned to what? To what was your assignment?
I was assigned to the Strategic Air Command, and on the 8th Air Force, and that was out of Japan. In those days, I think their headquarters were in Saipan.
Because the 8th Air Force at that point was then transferred to the battle in the
That's
Pacific.
right. Well, the 20th Air Force with General Spatz, that's who I was assigned to. But I was trying to get a job at Wright Field, which was our Materiel Command headquarters at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. And I was in Dayton with my wife when they dropped the weapon. And after that nuke experience, and I thought that the president did the right thing, and they told him all about it, and the Jap said, well, we'll give it some thought, so how would you like to have a second one go off? And then that convinced them. So I got myself assigned to the Flight Test Division at Wright Field, and Chuck Yeager and I were classmates together in the Experimental Test Pilot Academy of the United States Air Force.
That was at Wright-Patterson.
That was at Wright-Patterson.
In Dayton.
And the section I was assigned to was the Accelerated Service Test.
Okay.
I got to fly all the different types of airplanes, and my section was really responsible of putting time on the weapon system, not ordnance now, just airplane time, to see what's going to fall off of it. And that was my responsibility. And I did that work for about 4 years.
At Dayton.
At Dayton.
What convinced you to take a turn in your career towards testing?
I wanted to fly the new aircraft.
Ah, okay. And of course, you're an engineering kind of mind. You enjoyed the new stuff.
I was a lieutenant colonel at the time, and I knew that's where the action was going to be, so that's what you do. I always, well, you have to push yourself pretty hard. In any company, you get a certain reputation, and that's what I tried to do. A good reputation.
Right, of course. Well, during that time period, you and Betty Jo were there.
Yes.
In Dayton. You were there about 4 years. You are well known for the project that you put together. I suppose you told me anyway that you put together the project Fly Nonstop from, I understand, from, was it Honolulu to New York City?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell a little about that?
Well, my boss called me in one day and said, Thacker, I want you to do something with this P-82. And in those days, the Air Force, it was pretty quiet, and they're not adverse to publicity. So the company wanted, I started talking to North American out here in LA, and they said it'll fly it'll fly the distance from Tokyo to New York. And I had been flying the P-82, put a lot of time on it. I liked the airplane. And I said, no, that's impossible. Not with the fuel available. It'll go from Honolulu to New York if the Air Force will accept that. So the Air Force said, well, you know more about it than we do, so Honolulu to New York. Fine. So I assigned a captain and a first lieutenant to the program. And in about a week, my boss called me in and said, Thacker, you do it. That's easy. You do it. In the military, you do what you're told. It doesn't seem to work that way anymore. But I said, fine, there's no sweat. So I got together I came out to North American, and we made a few changes to the airplane. And we got a little more fuel in it than normal. And for the record run, we had 4 310 drop tanks, 2 under each wing, and we had 150 gallons back of each pilot. And I did insist on 2 radio compasses, 1 in each cockpit. So in case we lost one, there was no way of navigating, but I laid out from Hawaii to San Francisco, which is on a great circle route. I went 4 rum lines on that segment of the flight, and we were only off 2,500 miles. We were only off 20 miles. So I was kind of proud of that. But I waited in Hawaii for 2 weeks. I had to have 20 knot tailwind. So, and I'd been real good. I hadn't been to any parties. I'd been to a lot of them, invited. But one of the big real estate guys was very nice to me, named Thacker, incidentally. He trusted my arm. He said, I'm having a little party, and it would be great stuff if you could come. So I went that night, and I think I had 2 drinks, 2 Scotch drinks, and got back on the base about 11 o'clock at night, and I dropped by Weather. The guy grabbed me and says, Colonel, tomorrow morning is it. You got 20 miles an hour all the way to New York. So the only time I went out for a party was the night before I took off from Honolulu. So, you know, life is life. So we got the airplane all ready, and it had never been taken off with that weight. And we got about halfway to the States, and we flew between 17 and 20,000. Maybe we got up to 25,000 once or twice, but there was no checkpoints between Hawaii and San Francisco. And we were just guessing for ground speed, but we were just fishing. And I said to my co-pilot, I said, well, we just ran out of both tanks, they're both dry, and let's pickle them off. So I had complete control of the fuel system. He didn't, but I did. In those days, everything was manual. So I hit those 2 switches and felt one jerk. Those big bombs or fuel tanks have sway braces, and you screw the sway braces up to where they're not too tight, but they're loose enough to where the electronic switch we'll let the tank go. Well, only the people in Hawaii didn't know much about a P-82. But that's a long story. So only one drop off. So that kind of skewed me a little. But no sweat. So, but however, when we got over Wyoming, the other two tanks were dry. And I didn't get a jerk of any kind. So I flew with those three great big tanks all the way. Fortunately, the longer you flew, the lighter you got, and the better ground speed you made. And the longer you flew, the better mileage you were getting. So as I got close enough to my destination, I had 62 gallons left, enough to get to Boston, which was my alternate. But I was going into, what the hell was it? A little spot east of Pittsburgh. I figured we could get to Pittsburgh or just a little bit longer. But the longer we flew, the better our fuel consumption was.
How many miles was that?
That was 5,000 miles in 14 and a half hours.
Okay, that's still a record standing. My understanding is it's a four-piston engine.
Take off, the longest non-stop.
Piston.
Speed, best speed, well, prop-driven airplane between Hawaii and New York. Lots of little things.
Yeah.
But that day, that particular day, nothing happened in the world. So I was the front page news. And really, it's the truth.
What? Yeah.
There was nothing happened on that day.
Yeah.
So I made every front page newspaper in the country. And I've got stacked books of you know, that deep that would fly to the bed. Well, here, this is a hanging that a gentleman I did a favor to. And all of a sudden this came, and I've never seen anything like it. And I told Betty Jo, my wife, I said, honey, what are we going to do with this atrocious thing? I said, I'll just hang it over the couch here. And she said, that looks nice, honey, we'll just leave it there. Which surprised the hell out of me, because you don't see any airplane stuff in this room, do you? So, there it is. Yeah, but it's a wall hanging, I guess. But people have been so gracious to me, so, you know, I have no regrets, none.
So after you finished your tour probably, and your, I guess you'd call it a tour, with the test flight school, or test flight division there. What did you do after that?
I want to bring up one little side story, because I'm always telling war stories, and then the people say, well, now, Colonel, you should write a book, or is this written down someplace? I'll tell you a little side lump here. While I was in the Flight Test Division, our first operational jet, the P-80, Lockheed Shooting Star, the accident rate was 10 times what it normally should be. The chief test pilot, Milo Bertram, had just been killed in it. Dick Bong, our leading living ace, had just been killed in it. And my boss called me in and said, Thacker, I want you to go out to Lockheed, get 5 P-80s, take them up on the dry lakes, fly them for 500 hours with no accidents. He said if they can kill Dick Bong, our leading living ace, and the chief experimental test pilot for Lockheed, you're next. Yes, sir. So I took Chuck Yeager, 2 other pilots, out to Lockheed we go. They flew 5 P-80s.
Where were you flying from?
We went up to, that's the next question. I was just out of my mouth. We went up on the dry lakes
Muroc,
at Muroc.
which is now Edwards.
And yes, it was Edwards, but it was not Edwards. It was Muroc Army Air Base. And so we have a little conference with the pilots, and I was particularly emphasizing with Chuck Yeager. I said, we're going to fly 500 hours with no accidents, because if it can kill the chief pilot and a leading living ace, the Air Force is extremely concerned. And we will stay within a dry lake recovery area at all times. Everybody understand that? If we flame out, you've got to have altitude enough to make a dry lake, because there must be 100 dry lakes up there. Everybody agreed. Well, the next afternoon, I was flying around where I should be, and who do you think that was reporting to San Francisco Air Route Traffic Control? Chuck Yeager. So when Chuck got back on the ground, I said, Chuck, you're grounded for 2 days, and I want you to... Chuck and I are old friends, but that was, we flew for 500 hours. The problem was this. It's not a P-51 with a prop. It's an aircraft with a turbine. Turbines are very slow to react, and also the hotter it gets, the less thrust you have. And taking those into consideration, most of the pods we're having were high-scoring aces that thought they knew everything. So they'd come out to Long Beach to pick up a P-80 in the mornings, nice and cool, temperatures are cool. Take off, the airplane seems a little sluggish for takeoff, but nevertheless it's a jet, and I've been warned, so they're a little slow to accelerate. So you go into Albuquerque, first stop for fuel. Hotter than the houses of hell, and at 5,000 or 6,000 feet altitude. What do you think happens? They give it the needle. It rolls and 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 it rolls, it rolls, it rolls, it rolls, it rolls, honks back out through the goddamn fence and weeds and tears the gear off of the P-80. So it's just the learning curve. And the difference between Lockheed in the morning at Long Beach and Albuquerque in the afternoon was 102. We add the smart-ass aces, which I give them all the credit in the world. Chuck Yeager got 14, and I have the strongest regard for Chuck. Let me tell you a side story. You want to hear a side story? Not a sad story, a side story? Okay. Willems, chief pilot for Bell and the X-1. Slick wanted $150,000 for the first drop off of the B-29 with the X-1. The Air Force said, we're not going to pay that kind of money. We'll take the program. Chuck Yeager ran the whole program, and nobody knew what the hell was going on when you went through the speed if you ever got to Mach 1. Nobody, I don't care who they were. Chuck ran the whole program on a captain's pay, which was $112 a month. So I have the highest regard for Chuck. Chuck's gone a little Hollywood, but he deserves it, every penny of it. He did it. You can talk all you want.
I know.
but he did it.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a great cavity between the people like myself who loved to fly, and Chuck Yeager, Bob Hoover, and all that outfit I was with, and the money flyers. And the money flyers could not fly because they don't get enough of it, and they're only interested in the money. Chuck Yeager and Bob Hoover and those guys were interested in what they could contribute.
Yeah, they loved it.
They loved it, and so did I. But it does come a time when you're married and with a family, and you can't be a test pilot forever. So I went and got myself assigned to the Air Commander Staff School. I thought I would improve my career by going to school, which I did in 1948. I went from, so that's all for right now. I'm all through.